saw Craig. Where'd Craig go?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, we'll call to order the July meeting of the Keystone Heights Airport Authority. And we'll begin it, I think, with a prayer. Buck, would you like to lead us?
Oh, wow, I get to do that today. All right, let's do it. Father, we're grateful to be back again to just serve our town and to serve our country and to serve the people here at the airport. And God, we're grateful for all the blessings you've given us. So tonight we ask that you'd give us all wisdom, and I pray that the meeting would go smooth and we would just use the insight that you've given us to make smart decisions. And God, thank you for our team. Thank you for just all of us getting along and just respecting each other. And so tonight, guide us through this meeting, and we'll give you praise in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Pledge allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Play ball.
All right, roll call, Craig.
Mr. Kirkland?
Present.
Mr. Pryor? Here. Mr. Dashny?
Here.
Mr. Ludwig?
Here.
Ms. Hall?
Here.
General Eckert?
Here.
Colonel Benny?
Here.
All right. Any public comments?
Yes, sir.
Submitted. Okay, we'll move to the consent agenda. You all should have seen the May 2025 financials, as well as approval of the 2025 June board meeting minutes. Do you have any questions or discussion on that? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to approve those.
I make a motion, we approve them.
All right, and a second. Okay, we thank you.
Who's the second? I'm sorry, who's the second?
Bobby. All in favor of approving those consent agenda?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the ayes have it. We'll move to reports, starting with our engineering update from Bill.
Hey, good evening. Couple quick updates. The hangar project is still moving towards the grant process. I communicated by email with the FAA rep today. We have applied for 2 grants. One grant
Are
for,
these DOT grants?
these are FAA grants.
Sure.
On the hangar project, you already have your DOT grant.
Okay.
But park that, I'll come back to
Yeah,
that.
that's good.
Yeah, so we've applied for 2 FAA grants, one for $585,000, which is your bipartisan infrastructure law funding. That's 4 years of that type of funding. And then they also directed us to submit a grant application for 1 year of your non-primary entitlement funding, $150,000. And you're still eligible next year when we get into the next federal fiscal year for 1 more year of the bipartisan infrastructure law funding. So essentially, the 2 grants we could apply for now from FAA are applied for. The FAA rep said, no problems working through the system.
And those 2 grants for 2 different projects?
It's for the same project, it's just 2 different funding sources.
Okay.
So the FAA has to issue it as 2 grants. Makes it a little harder for Craig because he's got to manage multiple grants. You already have 1 DOT grant for that project. You remember the last time I presented, there is a budget shortfall, which we can either make up with additional FDOT funds. We have requested that. The FDOT told us, yeah, probably looks good, but we won't know till the new fiscal year. Well, today is the new FDOT fiscal year. My experience with the DOT is they take the month of July to kind of figure things out. They don't issue any new grants until August. So I've communicated with the contractor. The low bidder knows he's the low bidder, knows we're seeking funding. And as soon as we have certainty that the funding is all going to come in and cover it, I'll be back here to recommend you officially award the contract, sign the contract so the contractor can get started. The long story was that. The short story is grants are being processed. As soon as they come through, there's an auto signature process, which starts with Craig. And,
We have auto pens here?
Oh,
it's an email-driven macro, essentially, that runs off of a database software. But it'll travel from email to email. I think actually, General, it might go to you first.
Okay.
And then, Mr. Taylor, you're on the list. Craig will get copied every time. I get copied. The purpose of copying Craig is so we can call you and say, hey, you got something, don't delete it, don't ignore it. It's kind of a quirky email. A lot of times it goes in people's junk folders. But we'll monitor the process and get it. If everybody's available, it doesn't take any more than 2 or 3 days to click through the signatures one at a time. So, and you'll have to do that twice. There's 2 grants.
Okay,
And if you get them, you're not sure, just ping me and I'll,
We get 2 phone calls from you.
if necessary. Yes. I did have a client that accomplished it all in 1 day. The first notice went out like 9 a.m. and before 5 p.m., they had clicked all the way through.
Well,
So you now have a bar. Exactly. The bar has been set.
superior performer.
Let's see, master plan. We went through a couple rounds of comments on the first working paper, which is chapter 1, the facilities inventory and the forecast. Craig gave us some comments. We had a couple calls with him. We've since finalized that. Working paper 1 has been submitted to the DOT for review, and it's also been submitted to the FAA for review. So that's the status. We're working on other tasks to get ahead for the next 2 or 3 chapters. And our CAD guy is steady working away on updating bringing the property map up to date and the ALP up to date. We haven't really started into any of the developing alternatives or developing new projects. That's yet to come. The first thing we got to do is make sure the FAA agrees with the way we approach the aviation forecast. So we are working, but we're at a bit of a gate. We won't move very far past that gate because if they don't agree with our forecast methodology, we have to back up and get it to the point where both agencies agree with it.
Is there anything notable about the forecast?
No. I think the only thing notable was everybody now has VERTOWER data. I'll give you my opinion of VERTOWER data. The product is fine, but we're learning over time that not every airplane has ADS-B or always has it turned on. So there are ops that are not being captured. And the prevailing thought across the entire state, all 129 public airports, the prevailing opinion has been, hey, when you get this equipment, you're going to find that you've been undercounting ops. You have a lot more activity than you thought. I don't know if that's going to turn out to be true here. The number of ops is not much different, but the types that are being cataloged in the system they need some work. So we're going to have some extra justification to make to justify our forecast. But that's what we're prepared to do, and that's the goal.
Does it indicate there's something we should do different as an airport?
No,
Okay.
no, I don't think there's nothing like that.
Okay.
And this is just me again, I'm not a pilot, but until ADS-B is mandated, we're going to still have a significant number of airplanes that are either flying with it off or they're not even equipped with it.
Well, some airplanes don't have an electrical system yet.
Correct. Yeah. So, and you have some of those, so those aren't being counted at all. So that's where we are on the master plan. The fencing project, all of the fencing construction work is essentially completed. Craig has hired a surveyor to prepare an easement that will satisfy Clay Electric Co-op. They won't install the electric until we get the easement drawn. So the easement should be done next week. I corresponded with them today.
Is that the side that goes all the way up the road?
It comes up the south side. The easement will be drawn on the south side of the west side road.
Okay.
From State Road 100 all the way to the end of the road.
Okay.
I don't know if Clay Electric will install power the whole way. For the fencing project, we just need them to get power to the gate. And somebody else might know if they're going to install it all the way.
No, they will only install the conductor up to the gate where the transformer will serve the gate. Beyond that will happen only after whoever applies for service that may be building inside the airfield beyond the
We're doing
road.
the easement for the full length now. The easement was only $750.
So anticipating future.
Yep,
growth.
getting ready for the future. So that project's kind of stalled out. They're probably, again, 95% complete, but we can't test the gate operator, or there's no security light, there's no power to prove any of the equipment out. So project's just kind of at a standstill. So we're pushing on the easement, and as soon as we have the easement all executed, it has to go through the city. It's gonna have to go, city attorney has to review it, because the city actually signs it since they're the landowner. So still some hoops to jump through on getting the easement. The second item I have on the agenda is related to the West Side Service Road. Will you keep going?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so the low bid was below what had been provided as funding for, from the FDOT. So
Bid to do what?
the low bidder,
To do what, Tom? Exactly, what was the bid?
the low
West
bid to
side.
construct the fence.
Just the fence.
Yeah, the project that's already out there, that's under construction, that bid came in below estimate, and there was money left over in the FDOT grant. So Craig and I solicited the DOT to ask them if they would add to the project scope description that would allow Craig to go get some tree clearing done adjacent to the fence on both sides. So the DOT said they would fund that. There is funding available in the existing grant, but until the scope language is amended to add clearing and grubbing of trees, it's not eligible. So you have a copy of the, in the agenda packet, there's a copy of the revised FDOT grant, and there's a copy of the resolution, which I think is the last page in the packet. And so what is before you is approval by resolution to accept the grant amendment from the FDOT to add the scope of clearing and grubbing of trees into the project. No additional money for the project, but it would allow Craig to go get quotes and prices and have another contractor come in and do some tree clearing.
Is that something you need us to vote on?
Yes,
You have to accept the resolution.
Okay.
The grant
needs a
agreement.
motion and a vote to execute the resolution, which is the last page in your package.
Okay. Entertaining a motion to approve the resolution.
I make a motion, we approve the resolution for tree cleaning. Clearing,
No tree cleaning, just clear.
cleaning, yeah.
And do we hear a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And opposed, say nay. All right, the resolution passes.
That's the end of my report, unless anybody has any questions.
What can you tell us about the new budget and the ready projects and all that?
The state budget?
Mhm.
So I don't have exact numbers, but the state budget for aviation funding is down from prior years, and it's probably going to trend downward for another 2 years. It stays above 300 million, but it has been north of 320 in a couple years past. I'm not a lobbyist and I don't employ a lobbyist, but I listen. I think what's happening there was the general trend to reduce the budget as a whole. And then there has been for a couple years a trend to try to direct more FDOT funding towards roads and bridges. So I think two things happened at once. And so there's less money available in the overall FDOT aviation funding program. Still very robust compared to all other states, but when you get used to a certain level of funding, there's a little pinch when that goes down. I think two things that are related to that, and then I'll talk about Ready in a minute, because I think that's actually separate. You might have heard other discussion. The DOT told us about a month ago that in future funding years, they're not going to fund hangars, and they're not going to fund equipment purchases. An example of equipment purchase would be a batwing mower, a 100 horsepower tractor. They're no longer going to fund those types of projects. And again, in five years and beyond, they're not allowing airports to request funding for hangars. If you have a hangar project or an equipment project inside your 5-year program, it's safe for now, but they're not adding those types of projects in the future, because I think they're anticipating that slowly declining aviation funding available, which will probably plateau at some point. So I don't have a clear direction on what airports are going to do in that case. You're an example of an airport, with the exception of one hangar. I don't think you have any hangars in the last 10 years that weren't funded by the FDOT. You did venture out and build 160 by 60 hangar as a board several years ago. And I think you borrowed money for that. You just recently retired that debt, as I recall.
Correct.
Hangars cost a lot more than they do when you built that. So I think there's a financial question about whether you could even make the money work to borrow money to build a hangar on your own today. I'm not sure you could get the payback inside of any reasonable time period. So airports of your type have benefited greatly with the state funding hangar projects. Okay, here's an overlay, and it's the ready question. Rural Economic Development Initiative. Years ago, Jeb Bush established that program. It's statutorily described. Because you have a Stark address, you are eligible for ready funding, which has been a waiver of the local match. So a typical hangar project would be funded 80% by the state, 20% by the local entity. Because you're ready, the 20%'s been waived and the state's been funding 100%. The state has also, this actually happened in 2023, was a legislative change. If you want the legislative references, Craig and I have them in an email, but it was actually changed to the legislation that said 100% funding for ready projects is only available for runway and taxiway capacity projects and economic development projects. So when we first saw that about a month ago, the DOT wasn't sure what to do with that. In fact, I told you it was 23 legislation. The DOT has been a little slow to react. I have projects in multiple DOT districts. I can just tell you so far in the first month of trying to figure this out, each district is not treating it the same. I've asked if at the state level, if they're going to issue guidance for all districts to follow. And I didn't get an answer to that, which either means they're still thinking about that, or maybe they're going to let each district figure out for themselves based on district leadership, how they're going to comply with that statutory requirement. So typically a runway or taxiway capacity project, like the plainest example of that would be a runway extension and a taxiway extension. There's not many other definitions that plainly meet runway capacity. I guess a brand new runway could meet runway capacity descriptions, but if any airports in Florida are contemplating a new runway out of thin air. So Craig and I have already started some brainstorming about what other ways to define a project, a runway project, to meet capacity enhancement. We have at least one angle on that, but it still needs some more legs before it's ready to stand up. The other part of the legislation, economic development projects, the state has already said, or at least District 2 has already said, a hangar would qualify as an economic development project. So to the extent that you have hangars in the next 5 years, it appears they'll still be funded at 100%. But of course, I already mentioned, because of the other rule, you're not going to get hangar funded beyond 5 years. What other things qualify as an economic development project? Again, I think the plainest example of an economic development project is something brand new. You didn't have it before, and now you do. It brings a business. It brings the opportunity for employment. It brings the opportunity for more revenue at the airport. Those are sort of just some plain, straightforward approaches to what's economic development. Again, Craig and I, and Frank, other airports are facing all this, so I'm listening. There's an aviation conference in a month. I'm sure it'll be quite the discussion. I'll be listening for everybody else's.
Conference?
That's the Florida Airports Council Conference. I'll be asking and listening for everybody else's bright ideas about how to maybe justify a fuel farm renovation as an economic development project. Maybe there's an angle there. Again, different ways to justify runway projects. And I think the biggest hurdle for you, Craig's already run some numbers, not ready for publishing, but airports that airports that are part of a larger municipal government, like a county-owned and run airport, maybe a county has a couple $100 million in a budget. If that county has to all of a sudden come up with 20% of a $400,000 project, they got to come up with $80,000. Maybe that's not a big ask for a large municipality that owns an airport. You kind of get to a point, though, where the larger municipalities aren't ready, so they're already funding 20% of their projects.
Right.
And I'll just tell you, I'm already hearing opposition around the state where bigger airports are saying, it's about time you guys start paying your fair share. So there's some natural opposition to what your point of view would be, which is, hey, why are you changing the rules for us? We can't just generate another $100,000, $200,000, $500,000 to come up with a 20% match of a large project. So budgeting for that is going to be a challenge for small airports. I guess in the worst case, you have to defer or cancel some projects where you don't have your matching share. But I don't think we're anywhere near contemplating worst case scenarios. Like I said, there's a lot of ideas, most of which need legs before they're ready to stand on their own.
So since we're coming up to our budgeting cycle for the federal fiscal year,
Yeah.
Does what you've learned from this, current budget on the state side coming out, does it give us any insight as to things we should be planning differently for our budget for projects that?
Yeah. So you want to do some math?
Sure.
I think maybe part of the question you just asked was, if you have a project that's eligible for federal funding, historically, those have been funded 90% by the FAA and 10% by the FDOT. So in a 90-10 split, your 20% is just 20% of the 10%, which is 2%. So on an FAA-funded project, your lift is much smaller to come up with your 2% matching share. I will point out, however, you have an FAA-funded project in a couple of years, which is to rehab and reconstruct runway 523, $5 million. Your 2% is still $100,000. So relatively speaking, it's a smaller lift compared to the size of the project, still $100,000, still a lot of money. Your other runway project was going to be 100% funded by the FDOT. And because of this limbo, we agreed a couple of weeks ago with the FDOT that project's just sort of on hold.
Which one?
Rehab 1129. Because it's a $4.5 million project, you would need $900,000 for your 20% share. Not likely. The DOT agreed to put the project on hold. The funding is still sitting there. For at least a year, the funding will go nowhere. But if in the next year we don't figure out a way to either get the legislation changed or come up with other creative ways to justify the project as a capacity project, again, worst case scenario, that project could die.
So when you get down to the FAA is a federal entity.
Yeah.
FDOT is a state entity.
Yes.
So you're saying Jeb Bush is the one that started the ready, or that legislature did that. Is this something DeSantis is vetoing, or do you know
The ready share?
do you know where it's coming from?
I have only heard speculation about where it's coming from. It didn't come from the governor.
I mean, it's coming from this state legislature or
The
somebody.
state legislature in 2023, so 2 cycles ago now,
Okay.
passed legislative change to 2 clauses. Really, it's no more than 2 sentences. The change was no more than 2 sentences, but it can have a big impact depending on what airport you are and which projects you have in your program. Just as an example, I have another airport that's facing the same thing, and their view is sort of already, my next project's only $150,000. I can come up with $30,000 out of my county budget, I'll be okay. So there's like Craig does not have a friend to fly wingman for him there because, The ask here is over $1 million is what it adds up to if you do the math. And I think that's probably an anomaly. Most other ready airports don't have a $4.5 million runway reconstruction in the current year.
So with that said, let's say we get down the road 7 or 8 years or 10 years and we get our annual inspections. Bobby's been going out with them doing that. They do the pavement condition. What are we at risk at if that runway gets bad enough? I mean, then we say, well, no jets can land here, but can we continue? Or does the FAA have the ability to mandate, okay, you're closed, your runway doesn't meet it? Or does it impact our insurance? Can we not get insurance anymore because the condition of the runway is degraded so badly and we can't pay for it?
I'll answer that backwards because I can't help you on the insurance part. I see the question there. That seems like a really good question that I wouldn't ask it yet, but that you're going to have to float that up your insurance side.
Okay.
The other question was, I don't know that I've ever had in my career this happen. I am aware of other runways, however, that weren't supported by funding. And if a runway does not have a public funding source, an airport will struggle to maintain it. And eventually the 3-year inspections will give it such a low rating that it'll be down in the failed category. So many cracks, ruts, so much loose gravel, FOD. At some point down several years, at some point down the road, the DOT, not the FAA, the DOT might come around and say, that pavement is failed. And unless you do something, we're not going to license that runway for use under your state licensing program. Honestly, Scott, I think you're probably 10 years from that as a reality.
On 523?
On 1129.
What about 523?
523 is eligible for federal funding.
I know, but if we weren't to do it, I mean, how healthy is it?
I think both runways are in the mid category. They're like on a scale of 0 to 100. Nothing's ever 100, but also nothing's ever 0. But so there's a bit of a logarithmic scale in the middle. They're both PCI ratings of between 50 and 70, pavement condition index. At 70, they want you to start planning a rehab program. You're not failed, I think, until you get into the 20s. I'm only aware of one airport in the Panhandle years ago that had to close they actually closed a 3rd runway. They just kind of gave up on it. They had been using their own road and bridge crew to do maintenance, and it got too much for them. And they gave up on their 3rd runway, which is a different condition than giving up on a 2nd runway. Right. But that's all part of the calculus is as you approach that, we've asked for $4.5 million for a rehab project. If the legislation isn't changed, and if the 80-20 rule stays in place over the long span of time, you'll probably need to change your project request to something smaller where you have a chance of coming up with a match, more like a maintenance project, not a mill and overlay with new asphalt project. You currently have, and Scott, this might have been part of your question, you're currently weight restricted on 1129. If the project gets delayed, you might want to stay weight restricted. And again, Craig and I have been brainstorming. I don't even want to talk about what we're thinking about until it gets announced. So, because I would only have a half-hearted presentation to tell you what we're thinking. So.
Well, I think the thing you start to wonder is, so FDOT, does the lion's share of their funding come from fuel taxes, fuel sales, and other? No.
Comes from general revenue.
Okay. So and again, this is probably not even anything you can answer, and maybe I'm getting way ahead, and I think Craig even said you'd never even heard of Ready until you came to Florida, right? Your state had nothing like that. They paid their share.
Pays their fair share.
So the question becomes, now all these small airports, they can't come up with the money like Marion County and Umatilla and these small munis. Then suddenly you'd think, well, the DOT is going to now start having a surplus of money. and you don't have any way of knowing who's gonna get that, it probably just goes back in the general fund and then it'll be spent in some other. I guess that's way too far down the road. I'll even retract that
I
question.
do not think we have a surplus of money will ever be a problem. Because for every project that gets deferred or canceled, there are 4 other airports that have the match that'll take the money. So, and I also, again, this will sound very jaded. I'm not familiar with a state agency that doesn't attempt to spend all of its budget. It's kind of cast into the way the system works. It's there, we better spend it or we won't get it again next year.
So it sounds like our only alternative is work on our legislators to try to get them to reinstate some form of this, even if it's a reduction.
So 2 things have been floated, and I don't know how much, Craig is in contact with Florida Airports Council. They have a lobbyist, they're aware of this. This was discussed at a number of the recent regional CFAST meetings, which is a state group that meets regionally with airport managers. So it's now a known issue. I think so we're over the first hurdle, which is just educating people, hey, this is out here. The next thing, I think, the next phase is who's going to pick up the banner, and will the banner be, we're going to run this down and try to get it abolished completely, just take the language out? Are we going to try to find legislators that will revise the language? Maybe that one says you can get 100% funding for runway capacity and runway rehab. Problem solved. Now your project qualifies again.
Okay.
So I think there's probably 6 or 7 ways to skin the cat. But we're so early in that process, I don't know how that even takes shape. That's why the guidance was for your runway 1129 project, put it on hold for a year and give a chance to get through the next legislative cycle and see if something can get done. And if we're still here this time next year with no resolution, then we're closer to being toward, we've run 3 times, now what are we gonna do? It's
But
37.
523 is the closer target, right?
So actually, no, the way the projects were slated, runway 1129 was gonna be rehabbed first. And then it would be full strength to carry traffic during the 523 project. But I hear in your question a possibility that those priorities may flip. That's a possibility. Just because of the way when funding becomes available. The problem with that though, General, I'll tell you, because this is part of what my people are looking at. We're looking at a schedule and how to marry the dollars. The FAA money for that project is not for 3 more years.
For 523.
Yeah. So, and you can't magically ask the FAA to bring $5 million 1 year closer. They've slotted it in a year and it's probably going to stay in that year. They would do that if you were a large hub commercial service airport, but they won't do that for you, for this type size category of airport.
So did I just hear you, in 1129 maxed out at 12.5 on the weight or something like that, or 25,000?
Someone had made a note
It's
before I got here.
Extremely less than 523.
It can carry more than 12.5, I'm quite certain.
Yeah, I don't know where 12.5 came from. I just know that that's out there. I don't know that design work probably doesn't support that. So I'm not sure why that was ever instituted.
That's
Perhaps just to encourage more use of 523 because it's closer to the terminal and the main apron. I don't know. That predates me. But I agree with Craig. It could handle more than 12.5. It's only 75 feet wide.
Right.
So that's another difference between the 2 runways. So, well, long and the short of it is a lot of moving parts here. I may or may not know something at the August meeting, but again, I'm going to the annual conference. My guess is DOT staff is going to be tight-lipped and not want to talk about it because I think they're all waiting to see what else shakes out. Are they going to get statewide guidance? They're going to maybe let the typical thing for districts would be, hey, well, let's let another district run out in front and see what happens to them. If they come back with bloody knuckles, we'll know not to do that. So that's just maybe human nature. And I'm only aware of what 3 districts are doing, and there's a total of 7. So I need to get some other feedback from my colleagues that are working in other DOT districts. Some of them haven't even taken up the issue yet. They know it's there, but they haven't met with their airports to tell them what's happening. District 2 was proactive, one of the first ones to meet and say, hey, we got to get on the phone, something changed, we got to tell you what has changed. So I'm only aware of one other district that was been proactive that way.
I got one other question.
I got one other answer.
Well, and I don't even know if you have an answer to this. So St. Johns County in recent years has seen explosive growth with Nocatee and those areas over there. So when these developers come in, they take subdivisions and they create an impact fee because they have to enlarge schools or not enlarge, I'm sorry, they probably have to build new schools. They have to build new treatment plants for sewage and that sort of thing. And again, this will probably be a question for somebody in the legislature. But I wonder if there's some way to get in on Clay County or Bradford and have some kind of an impact fee. I wonder if any airports will go that way where they might say, okay, you're gonna build a new subdivision. Every home you build has got a $250 impact fee that goes to or transportation in general. You ever heard of anything like that being tried? Or is that really a stretch?
So there are regulations that the counties have to adhere to with respect to impact fees. You just can't use it anywhere for anything.
Okay.
Yeah. And just sort of off your question a little bit, but within the same target range. Most airports that I'm familiar with want to be able, they don't want to rely on the tax roll. They don't get tax relief, and they don't want to rely on that.
Okay.
The whole goal of airports and the FAA and the FDOT funding system has been helping you be self-sustainable. You operate in the black on your own. Obviously, you get capital funding from state and federal grant sources, but not relying on city or county taxation, not becoming a taxing entity has been, in my experience across Florida, that's almost every airport's goal. They don't want to become a taxing entity because of what else comes with that. You have a whole nother
Strings
bag of
attached,
scrutiny.
yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole
Okay.
other level of scrutiny that comes with that.
Okay, true. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Hey, one last thing, the governor didn't veto our turn lanes project? So, but it didn't get fully funded either, right?
No, I might need some help from others. The ask was north of 4 million, I think, for the
Well, it's
turn lane
phased, right?
project.
The complete project was north of 4 million.
Yeah.
Our revised appropriation request was 2.6,
Yeah.
which included just the entrances to both roads.
Yeah.
It did not include the connecting road.
Right.
I did hear as well that it had made it into the budget, but DeSantis still had the magic line item veto.
He did not veto it.
Okay.
We got the list. It's not on the
There's
veto.
700 and something thousand.
Yeah, that's the problem, though.
Budget.
It didn't seem like it was the amount that we asked for, so I don't even know what we can do with it. It wasn't a 2.6, it was like under $1 million.
So it's too bad Craig went out, and maybe you can ask him later when he gets to his report. But I know that Craig's been engaged with Scott Cornegay in a conversation. They built a piece of road there now, and I think they're working on a plan to say, what can we do with $700,000? And let's do it. What makes sense? And in what way can we use that efficiently and for the purpose it was stated to advance the project?
So he hasn't talked to you about it.
I only saw one email this afternoon. I haven't had time to read it. I would be,
Craig, we're talking about the fact that we did not get vetoed for the turn project, but we don't know what that means, so, because it wasn't the same amount that we'd asked for. So have you guys already talked about what we can do with that money then?
That's Scott Cornegay's
Yeah.
job.
yeah, there was,
Okay.
is that what there was an email from Scott this afternoon, and I didn't read it, but
Does he have any
he's
ideas or?
taking the lead on that.
Okay. That's not really in your.
So was the amount reduced from our appropriation request?
770's in my head, David, but 700,000 and something
Yeah,
is what you got.
it's like, what do you do?
That'll probably pay for the stripes on the road up there.
Okay,
Good golly.
thanks, Bill.
Yeah.
All right. Jim Taylor, I think you're up.
Evening. I think you all have seen these things. The FAA has issued a letter ruling dismissing firms' administrative Part 16 complaint that have been filed with the FAA. And what that means is the FAA is not going to look into it, not going to take it up, and there's nothing further the airport needs to do about it. In the meantime, a firm filed a complaint in the Circuit Court of Bradford County, and with it filed a motion for a temporary injunction. The purpose of the motion for temporary injunction is to ask the court to prohibit the airport from removing the safety hazard presented by the racetrack to the extent it intrudes outside of firm's leasehold boundary and into the RPZ boundary, until such time as the judge, who will be George Wright, the circuit judge in Bradford County, until Judge Wright has an opportunity somewhere down the line to adjudicate the case on the merits at a trial. Temporary injunctions are disfavored, and therefore one who seeks one has a heightened burden of proof to get one. Judge Wright has, at our request, scheduled a hearing, which will be an evidentiary hearing. The court will take testimony and receive evidence for a half day on July 31. That's been scheduled. All of that being said, and you all may be aware of this, but the Sunshine Act affords a public agency such as the Airport Board to have a meeting with its lawyer in private, outside of a public meeting context, if the attorney requests it and requests advice and direction from the client, the board, with respect to the lawsuit that's now pending in state court in Bradford County. And I am hereby requesting that we schedule such a meeting. They're colloquially referred to as shade meetings. As soon as the board members are available to have one. I've got concrete thoughts about our response to the motion for temporary injunction. I've already worked with and talked with Craig about a preliminary evidence outline for the hearing. I just want to have the airport's advice and direction as we move forward with this lawsuit. The portion of the statute that addresses these shade meetings is not clear about this, but I think since it's phrased as the agency may hold such a shade meeting, I think then, for the sake of good order, if the board or members of the board were to agree that it's advantageous to the airport to do what private clients can do all the time, speak in private with their lawyer about that it be motioned and seconded and voted. Then we'll need to talk about, if the board so votes, we'll need to talk about when we can schedule one. I think we could do one consistent with these meetings when the board, if the board decides to hold one. These shade meetings follow a very specific protocol as to how they must unfold and how they're conducted. And in terms of how they unfold, I have to make the request at a public meeting, which I've now done. And then if the board agrees and votes to do it, then we'll need to give public notice of the meeting. It will not be a public meeting if the statute is clear that we must give a public notice, and that notice must specify who will be attending the meeting. And the only permissible attendees are the board members, Mr. Kuhn as the airport's manager, me, and we will have to have a court reporter there who will transcribe the entire meeting. That transcription, once it's prepared, will be kept by the airport custodian. In this case, that would be Mr. Kuhn. and will essentially be sealed, not available for public scrutiny until after the lawsuit is adjudicated, at which point in time it would be publicly available to anybody who asks for it. So that's sort of the protocol. And there's protocol as to how the meetings are conducted themselves, but we can address that at the meeting. So the notice must set forth the time and date of the meeting and list the attendees. And I believe in these circumstances, the requirement is reasonable notice. I think anything over 12 hours notice might be sufficient. I know we ordinarily, I believe, give 72 hours notice of our public meetings. But since we're giving public notice of a non-public meeting, I would think that, and I can't speak for everybody's schedule, of course, and I know it's a bad week because Friday is the 4th, but we could have the meeting, if we got notice tomorrow morning, which is Wednesday, we could have the meeting Thursday afternoon or evening. And I'm not saying everybody.
Say Thursday?
Yes, this Thursday. But I think because we do have the hearing scheduled for July 31, and because I know from reports from Mr. Kuhn of his recent contacts with FAA, they're looking for us to take action here. So as soon as the board members can reconcile their calendars and we can get a time when everybody can get together, would be better.
So this hearing on the 31st would only include you, their representative or their legal representative, and the judge? Or, I mean, nobody would be subpoenaed from here yet at this point. This is just an injunction to keep us from, or keep them from having to remove that section of the track. Is that your understanding?
This is an evidentiary hearing,
Okay.
which is different from the usual hearings that one encounters in a civil lawsuit, in which it's usually just the lawyers making legal arguments to the judge. This is a hearing where the court can and will be hearing testimony of witnesses and receiving documentary evidence into the record. We have a half day, starts at 9 o'clock, so we've got 3 hours. We have to be very efficient with our proof, both sides, because we don't have an abundance of time. It will be important for us to get to the judge ahead of time, a memorandum of law in opposition to their motion. Judge Wright is a very good judge. We have a lot of confidence in him, and whatever we provide him, he will read, and he will be prepared when the hearing starts. So that's my job. But there will be witnesses. I'm sure that firm will call one or more witnesses, and so will we. I've got very concrete ideas about that. And that would be part of a discussion in a shade meeting.
Okay, and strategy. So,
Correct.
okay. And you think the sooner the better to have this meeting?
The sooner the better. And I recognize this is short notice, especially given that we have a holiday weekend coming up. And it's the summer in general.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we, well.
Let's discuss
I don't know
dates
about the
first.
rules.
Yeah, let's look at dates.
Yeah, let's talk who's got dates.
Okay, fair enough.
I leave Thursday out of town
Yeah.
for a couple of days.
I do
Me
believe,
too.
I do believe that there should be a formal motion, second, and vote.
Right.
On simply the fact
On
of
have it
wishing to
first.
have such a meeting.
Okay.
Well, and I can make the motion if somebody can second, we can have discussion also
Yeah,
before we take the vote.
Right.
So that's it. So
Well, the motion is
to
to
just have the shade tree meeting.
set,
Right,
motion is to approve a shade meeting with our attorney.
right.
Okay, so you're making that motion?
Sure.
I'll second his motion.
Yeah.
All right.
Is that fair enough?
All in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
And all of those opposed? Nay, okay. So the motion is passed to have a shade meeting, and it's just a matter of deciding on dates and times.
All right, so the most important thing is our schedules, but if we moved it to the next, when are you gonna get back? If you go on vacation on the third? Because the thing is, you need time, right? To
I get
prepare.
back on Tuesday.
I need,
Okay, so
I need time to prepare for the hearing for sure. But
Yeah.
I don't need a whole lot of time to prepare for the meeting with the board.
Gotcha. So he doesn't get back till the 8th.
Right.
So somewhere on the 9th or 10th?
I'm working the 9th, so.
You what?
I am available the 10th. That's.
I'm open
Okay.
tonight.
See that, Dave? You're not available?
I'm wide open on the 9th.
What about the 10th? Because you're not on the 9th.
Right.
So the 10th. Anybody have a problem with the 10th?
Are
I'm
you
open-
thinking, are
I'm
you
open
thinking
on
of
the
the
9th
evening,
and
6
10th.
o'clock?
Well, that's a good point. I don't know. I'm just trying to pick the 10th that we don't have conflicts.
I'm good, so you
The
all
10th?
decide.
Anybody got a,
Well, let me ask
Okay.
this too, and this is no offense to you. You've just gotten on the board in the last 8 months, or when were you appointed?
8 months?
Is it even critical you be here? If you feel like we need to meet earlier?
No, he's got to be here as a chairman. He's got to be here for the shade meeting.
The chairman has to, the vice chairman can't run a shade treating meeting?
It would be ideal that the chairman
This is an
participate.
important meeting, guys.
Yeah.
We need to all be here for that.
Right.
yeah.
Okay,
So anybody have a problem with the 10th?
Let me say this.
I do not.
I'm going to be working to get ready for this hearing
Right.
before any shade meeting occurs, okay? Nevertheless, the ultimate decisions have to be yours, and that's the advice I'm seeking. And there's a lot of issues in play here. Some of it has to do with potential settlement stances. Some of it has to do with discussing, litigation expenses. So there's a number of things to talk about. And there's several important moving pieces here. But I'm going to start working to get ready for the hearing in advance of a shade meeting. But the sooner the better, although I'm not going to give you any particular date by which I think we have to have it.
So the 10th's wide open for me.
But he had a very good question. What time? I'm open the whole day.
I'm open the whole day.
Whether you want to do it in the morning, Mr. Chair, or you want to do it at the evening.
Terry, do you have any constraints? So earlier on
I'm
the
available.
Your call.
10th,
The 10th would be next Thursday?
Yeah.
Sure.
And that'll give you enough
9
time.
o'clock, is that
Doesn't matter to me.
9 o'clock good?
Whatever's most convenient for all of you.
What are you guys?
Yeah. Well, I do have an FA meeting that morning.
So when would you rather do? What's a good time?
Are you off on the 10th?
I'll be coming home that day.
I can do the 9th as well.
Anytime.
Okay.
I'm gonna make myself open anytime during the day. If I miss that meeting, it's okay.
Is earlier in the morning better?
That's fine.
Okay,
I think we should allot a couple hours or so.
sure. Is 9 o'clock good?
Fine for me.
Yeah.
9 a.m.?
9 o'clock.
9 a.m. Thursday.
9 a.m. on the 10th?
Talk with you tomorrow morning about the things you noticed. And I'll get a court reporter.
Okay.
And we'll have the meeting here. I'm assuming.
Be fine.
All right.
Greg, you'll send out an invite, just so everybody have it. Make sure everybody has it, in
Yeah, okay.
case somebody forgets to put it in their calendar.
What was that?
I say in case someone forgets to put it in the calendar, Craig can send an invite out.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the injunction. There's a second activity going on too, right? The firm submitted 2 suits, I thought. One of them was an injunction and there was another.
Well, the motion for the temporary injunction is filed within the same case that was created by the filing of the complaint.
Okay,
The motion is an adjunct to the complaint.
okay.
The complaint, as you all will have seen, is wide-ranging.
Right.
I'm not going to comment on it in this meeting beyond saying I think every single count is without merit. But the motion for temporary injunction is very specific. It's a rifle shot issue don't let the airport remove the safety hazard until you, Judge Wright, can hear this case on the merits at some future date.
Okay.
And for clarification, I was not discounting your position as chair.
No.
I was concerned more about the quickness of doing it and that you'd be brought up to speed possibly later by him. But
We good.
anyway, if everybody's good with that, you're good with that?
Good.
Can I ask just a question on the evidentiary hearing? Is that something we would anticipate board members needing to clear their schedule off to be available for the 31st?
No, unless our ultimate decision is that we want one or more board members to testify at the hearing. And we can discuss that when we get together.
Okay,
Okay.
all right.
I could give you a strategy on that.
I don't want to hear about your strategy, Scott.
You put me on the stand and I'll talk that judge into a coma. Because you know I don't talk very much.
There might be some judges who would be susceptible to being comatose.
But this one,
Just let,
But it's not Judge Wright.
just,
All right.
all right.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
And we've gotten everything you need to do for your shade meeting.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. Next topic on the agenda is lease proposals. We have a guest here today, Mr. Falconer from the MHD Rockland Company that has an interest in talking to us about some directions his company is planning.
Thank you, General. Members, I have a quick little handout just so everybody can keep track. David doesn't have to write so fast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kind of go over.
Thank you.
Sir.
So I just kind of wanted to give you, I haven't been here in a while, so I'm going to give you a little update about where MHD Rockland's at, what we've just proposed to Space Florida, and we can kind of go from there and see what y'all think. So right now, MHD Rockland at the airport is paying about $200,000 a year in lease payments for the buildings that we lease. We've invested nearly $1 million to date in tenant improvements and infrastructure improvements at the airport since we got here in 2016. And our average fuel load for every day we fly generates, well, I don't know what it generates to you all, but we pay about $17,200 for every day that we decide to go fly, which is right now, actually, we have a plane up. Monday, our president, after visiting with our bank is HSBC, Bank International Bank, had a visit with them on Friday and went over what we were going to propose to Space Florida, and the bank agreed that we should move forward with it. So on Monday, our president sent an email to Space Florida, Matt Chestnut, who's a business development director, requesting a construction product, that we start looking at a construction project again. The ask in the email was for 22 to 25,000 square foot hangars. The minimum requirement we have is a 150 by 150, 50-foot height clearance. We want one configured just to support aircraft paint and maintenance. So one would have to have some additional equipment added to it for filtering for paint. And we'd also like to have some component level shops and offices integrated into those hangars. All the hangars would be air conditioned and insulated workspaces. We're also asking them for one warehouse of approximately 60,000 square feet with office space included in that 60,000 square feet. Our preference would be to have sprung structures deliver that structure, but that's going to kind of be a Space Florida call, not necessarily an MHD Rockland call. And the reason was we put forward the idea that Marshall Aerospace in the United Kingdom has built this really nice hangar that's in your attachment A, which is the second sheet. There's some examples of it. Very nice configuration for what we want. The reasons we like it, it's fast to put up and it's very economical. And they look nice. They actually look really nice. The Blue Origin hangars in, I think in Tampa, are all sprung structures. So the buildings Some of the specs that we gave them, they would all be insulated and air conditioned. We have engineering one load for up to 210 miles an hour, which we can do and request. We're looking at a faster construction time. The example that Sprung gave with on their website that you guys can follow is the Marshall Aerospace hangar went up in about 12 weeks. So that's pretty fast. The hangar that we were originally looking at before was a single span 300, correct me if I'm wrong, so 320-foot single steel span.
Yeah.
And that's about a $30 million building. And so what we'd like to do is not spend that much money on one building. There's some HR impacts that are going to come along with it. Oh, back to the building costs. We're estimating right now, just in the pure building costs, not in site development or apron work or anything else, but we're estimating it's going to be about 15 million just in building cost. Now, Space Florida's got some calculation that they use to say, okay, well, based on the apron space and et cetera, then we're going to estimate it's going to be this much more for all the, you know, the earthwork and the groundwork and all the other things will come into that. Fire suppression systems. I'll get to that in a minute. The HR impact that we see right now from those buildings would be just in A&P mechanics would be 15 to 25 A&P mechanics. And in the warehouse, we would add probably 5 or 10 more jobs in inventory control and shipping. So the A&P mechanics are, I think our average last wage, we had to provide an average wage something for Bradford County, and I think our average wage out here is about $92,000 a year. So for the area, it's pretty high.
I can work for you.
Yeah.
Are those, Todd, are those additional jobs?
Yes, sir.
From what you have now?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We have several drivers that are hitting us all at one time. It's kind of the perfect storm thing again. So we need to make a decision now to be able to execute in 27, which is about when we're thinking 27, mid 27. We have a request from some foreign military operators in the U.S. government actually to do their primary depot maintenance and continue to do that work, which we're doing right now. Some of the work that we need to do for the U.S. government is going to require an enclosed hangar. So the conditions we have right now, one, aren't very people friendly, and two, just we can't take the risk with the aircraft.
So I can't take what?
The risk
For what?
having the wind hit the aircraft
Gotcha.
in the air, it has to be isolated. We're gonna have one plane isolated for about 9 or 10 months. Nobody will be able to walk on board. We are also currently doing propulsion test flights for a new propeller system for the P3. That should start in October. We're going to put Collins Aerospace is the OEM, and they've made an 8-bladed propeller similar to what the Air Force is flying the C-130s. It's the same propeller, actually, different software, same propeller. Nobody's ever bothered to put one on a P3, so we decided to get a group together. Collins is supporting it. We're going to put one propeller on and do a bunch of tests for the engineers, and then after that, we're going to put all 4 on and actually do some tests, a lot of test flying actually for that. If that deal goes through, then part of that agreement is that we will be the distributor and the installer for that system. So, you know, any military that wants that on their P3, they can pay us to go install it on site, or they can bring it here, which is a lot cheaper. So that's a pretty big traffic increase.
So what you're saying is this is a same engine propeller combination that's used on the C-130, but they're gonna need to do a lot of airframe testing.
Same propeller, different engine. We have a different engine than the C-130 does.
Oh, okay.
It's technical. Ours are right side up. Theirs are upside down.
Is it still a dash 14?
No, ours are dash 14. They are dash 15.
Oh, 50?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, it's basically the same thing, but you know how it works. It's,
Yeah.
You got to prove everything.
Right.
A lot of airframe.
Airframe testing,
Yes. So a lot of flight hours, you know, going up and.
And jet fuel
yeah.
savings.
Vibration testing, yeah.
Yeah, so this propeller, I'll geek out for airplane geeks here for a second. So the propeller is an auto syncing.
Yes, please do.
Auto syncing 8-blade propeller. So it'll also take our noise category down 2 categories for the P3. but it auto syncs, I think 3 times a second or something like that. And I guess the creepy thing that everybody's wondering is, because when the C-130 first started doing it, it really messed with a lot of C-130 pilots' heads because, one, there was no noise, there's no vibration,
Yeah,
and they could hear the wind hitting the windshield and coming around it.
Wow.
They'd never been able to hear it.
Right.
I guess the first time they retracted the gear and the nose gear came up and slapped in place, it scared everybody. You just don't hear that now.
Wow.
But we're pretty excited about that. It's going to be a nice system. The other thing we have going on is we just received, last month, we received word back. We submitted a type certificate application to the FAA for a P3C and received the initial approval, and we should have the final packet back on that within 120 days, so sometime in July or August. Once that moves forward, then we'll move forward a little bit faster with the firefighting aircraft. We're going to be transitioning 3 planes. The goal right now is to get 1 plane completely certified by the FAA, the STC done to the tank, and then we can start flying all the test requirements that the Forest Service and Department of Interior and the Department of Agriculture and everybody's going to require us to do for the firefighting aircraft. Once we get the first one done, then we can finish the other 2. So.
Those aren't with new propellers though, are they?
No, sir, they're not, and it's going to come down to what the flight test data shows. We're not sure how well the new propellers are going to slow down. And one of the things that all the fire agencies really like is the ability of a P3 to dive down a valley and basically, throw the boards out and slow the plane down.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know if that's going to happen or how it's going to happen or what it's going to be, what the numbers are going to be until after the flight profile is done for that. So I would like to have it done because we won't have to change an entire propeller anymore. We can change 1 blade.
I assume it saves a lot in gas too, right?
Yeah, 20%.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's a huge fuel savings.
Pays for itself fast.
yeah.
Well, then the problem is getting the production. The Air Force has got production tied up, I think, for the next 2 years. So it'll all work out timing wise. By the time we get done with all the flight testing and everything, I think it'll be just fine. So some of the other risk factors that we have noted before and talked about at Keystone Heights airports, these are future discussions. I just put these on here so that we can talk about them. The taxiway the taxiway echo approach that's going to have to be installed to, assuming that we went back to the original lease that we were looking at before, or the environmental assessments done. There's a section of taxiway echo that would have to be built. The runway 529 closure is a concern, what the time frame looks like, because I heard what the time frame was supposed to be on that taxiway project and it went a little long. But it is a concern because we cannot operate off of 1129 as is. So it's too narrow and none of the pilots feel comfortable taking off or landing when we have, what did I figure, 7 feet leeway between the edges. It's just too narrow. And then, the same arguments, lack of standard resources here, water, sewer, fire lines, that kind of thing. Independent fire suppression, the last time we got a firm cost on it was $3 million, and that was been 2020. So I'm sure it's probably twice that much now. So.
You point to taxiway echo. Is at the bottom?
Yes, sir.
It's inside parallel.
Yeah, it's this little piece right here. This is echo. Future, yeah.
It's a future taxiway.
And this little piece, the way Bill had drawn it up before, was we were going to connect to that entrance.
Todd,
Let me help you.
yeah,
There on
look
the
at,
whiteboard if you want.
yeah, there's a depiction right there.
Yep. This little piece right here is taxiway echo,
Mm-hmm.
and then this would be installed. I don't know how that, the whole campus or whatever would be arranged, but if it was similar to this, we're gonna have a ramp and an apron coming up that we have to attach to the taxiway. So this piece right here.
That's assuming you build your hangars on that
That's
portion of the
correct.
field. Is that the only portions of the field that you feel are compatible with your long-range plan?
No, but that's the only one I know right now has an environmental assessment that's buildable. And that was quite a process.
Right.
So there is one other option that's in the process. We do have an EA that's being done
On the
100 acres.
100 acres.
Mhm.
Clay County Economic Development, but I don't know what that time frame looks like.
Probably end of the year. There was a distinct advantage when we started the environmental assessment here
Right,
of being in Bradford County.
Correct.
correct.
As opposed to being in Clay County.
Clay County is pretty hard it was very difficult for us to deal with the first time, so. And much more expensive.
Okay.
Happy to answer any questions if anybody has any. Thank you very much.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
So what about the existing buildings that you're in now? Do you plan to stay in that or move all the operations to the new campus? Because we know too that you've got a warehouse and start that's just recently been rented. So what are your plans about those existing buildings?
They would all be moved to this location.
Okay,
Yep. And the warehouse would start too. That's on it. We only have a 2-year lease there.
okay.
So,
You'd envision vacating these?
yes, sir.
And you mentioned the year 2027, but how soon would you want to build, providing you got approval? Yesterday?
8:00 tonight's great.
Okay.
It's good.
Mr. Prang,
Sure.
so that taxiway, and we discussed this with another potential tenant over there. Is there any way we can get money if they know that there's economic development, or is this get back to that? If it isn't on your 5-year plan, just hope and pray?
Now, so Scott, in general, projects that are in the 5-year plan get funded. Projects that come up, you can make requests, but there's no guarantee they'll be funded. There are times when I think we'd be talking about the state. There are times when the state budget in a fiscal year cycle has projects from other airports that couldn't be done, there's surplus funding. So sometimes that happens. That almost never happens in the first month of a fiscal year. That happens in month 6 and beyond. Nobody's giving up their DOT money in the first month of the fiscal year. That probably makes common sense. So, but yes, developing, I'm sure we have a cost estimate for that. I don't have it on the top of my head. But I could probably refresh a cost estimate for the part of taxiway Echo that includes the connector and a short section of the parallel taxiway. I could come up with an estimate of what that is, and we can, I can help Craig make a request to the state for that.
Do you see, or I don't even know if you've had any dealings with Space Florida, would they finance that as part of his project, or have you already talked about that with them?
No, we haven't, because the way I understand from a commercial entity, the way Space Forward is going to work is we're all going to work together and we're going to come up with one big price. And then they're going to, put forward the money to have it built. At the end of the day, when the certificate of occupancy comes forward, they will turn everything over to the airport, and then we take over and pay it by lease, by whatever the agreed terms are. That would then be tacked onto my lease, and that's what I'm not going to pay for. I'm not going to pay for airport infrastructure.
Right.
So I don't know if Space Florida would pay for it or not. I just know that I don't think it could be in the same case maybe as our case, because they're going to give our case some code word. I don't know, but I don't want to end up I'm going to pay for enough infrastructure, just to be out there as it is. So I really don't want to pay for, the more money I spend on infrastructure is the less money I can spend on the resources that I need to do the work. So.
How many acres do you think you're looking at?
I don't remember, sir. I think last time we talked about was 12.
I remember 15, but.
Okay,
that
yeah,
might have
it's somewhere in that area.
You had a simulator building, and the
Yeah,
original concept had a lot of other things in it.
Australia decided to go ahead and make beer cans out of the simulator, so we didn't get that. But but, so that's not necessary right now. It's mainly gonna be the hangar space.
So that's 12, 15 acres is all those buildings you just talked about?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Would it still, so it won't use that full footprint that's depicted there?
I wouldn't think so. That hangar was,
You know,
Okay.
maybe just instead of
What's
the,
depicted there in orange is big enough to put 5 airplanes in it.
yeah,
But keep in mind, for the environmental study, we were studying a max build-out.
yeah. So, and just to be open, I asked my boss for 3 hangars. He said you can have 2. So I should have asked for 4.
well, here's where I'm going with it. And I don't know if there'd be any animosity is not the word I'm looking for, or conflict would be better. But I think you're aware there was another tenant that was looking for adjacent land. Do you think you could work as a neighbor with that entity?
That would really depend on the layout. And we want to allow room in the future because I can see in the very near, we're gonna need more hangars than 2.
I just wondered if we got that other tenant potential and you, if we could have a better stab at getting that taxiway, because we've got 2 businesses going in, but I don't
I
know
think that'd just be a negotiation and to look at what the layout, what the
what their
possible
footprint would
layout
be.
Yeah,
Okay.
and what they're doing.
So what did Matt Chestnut want for next steps from you and us?
Next step is on him, so I haven't heard that yet, sir. I'll be sure to notify Greg as soon as we know. Last time, they came out here to meet with us and outlined with their program manager and their finance person, what the next steps were gonna be, and then we had a group meeting with everybody to go through. There's a lot of decisions that have to be made. Do we want them to just fund it and we pick the contractor? Do we want Space Florida to handle it? And I'm gonna say I want Space Florida to handle it. I don't wanna do the bidding and, scope of work and all that stuff. That's, I know I'm probably gonna recommend does all the initial stuff like before. If that's okay with you all as a board, we worked with AECom last time just because he has the tribal knowledge out here and it went very smooth. So I would definitely propose that happens again. And Matt didn't have a problem with that last time. But at this point, I don't know what the next steps are gonna be. I would assume they're gonna be similar to what they were last time. More details.
Does Space Florida have an idea what you're, based on the value of the completed project is, do they give you an idea of what your monthly lease should be, or do we decide that?
That's between you and Space Florida
Right.
and us, but we're kind of the third party at that point.
I mean, I'm wondering if you had those incomes over there, speaking to you, Craig, if that would be enough that if we went and got a loan, if we had to do the taxiway with those leases, would we make enough money to possibly pay the loan back to get the taxiway made?
I would assume, just from what we've already talked about, it's gonna be well north of $1 million a year in lease. So I don't know how much farther north, but I would think that's a good starting point.
Okay.
And not to mention the obvious fuel's gonna go way up, yeah.
Yeah.
Does your document suggest a lease term length?
No, the last time we did with Space Florida, they like to see more than 25 years. But then it becomes an airport authority discussion of how long do you want it to be? And it becomes a negotiating point.
Yeah.
And didn't you say the FAA is getting where they don't want to do 20, but you can do multiple?
I think for something like this, they would do more than 20, but they do have an upper threshold.
Yeah.
Where if the lease term gets too long depending on the type of lease and the investment amount, you might have to request a release for that purpose.
It's 50 years, that's
Yeah.
that's the high end.
Yeah.
But 30, I think they would do without.
Yeah, I think that
They have
before,
around
we were
30.
talking at 30 or 35 or somewhere.
They don't like, if somebody, generically, anybody wants a 50-year lease, they view that as essentially the disposal of the property because it's such a long span of time and you have to go through, you don't actually dispose and sell the property, but it's the same process to get a formal release approving the lease term. And I would shy away from that if possible. That's a complicated process.
Yeah. Probably what would help us the most at the moment is to kind of narrow down how much acreage you're really kind of looking at the moment.
I would defer to Mr. Prang on that because I don't recall exactly what it was. It was, I thought 12 to 16 acres somewhere in there. If you're
Can we
saying,
rely just generally now on what was in the previous study?
yes, sir, I would think so.
You know, I don't have that with me, but I can pull that back out and circulate it to Craig and he can share it.
Okay,
There's
What was the
more.
previous study
that'd be
about?
helpful.
So in 2020, I believe, we started an environmental assessment. And as a partner to that, AECom, this is gonna get complicated. AECom actually was contracted by Bradford County to do the environmental assessment because they got the grant to pay for the environmental assessment. And so we won a contract with Bradford County to do the environmental assessment. And then separately, the board allowed AECom to work directly for MHD Rockland. We developed a site-specific master plan for the Rockland build-out. And the Rockland build-out, site-specific, that came first, and then we used that, which is generally depicted there in orange and light blue. We plugged that into environmental assessment as the anchor development site for all of that environmental study.
And that site would work for what he's proposing now?
Yes, the site that he's proposing would be somewhat smaller than what's
Oh.
depicted there.
That's what I was wondering.
Similar but smaller. So I would think that for round numbers, just to get started on a conversation, we could look at some of the graphics. That's just a summary graphic. The whole report has other graphics in it. We could probably assume a lease limits, or lease size based on the other study elements.
We had planned, general, this orange area was the hangar. So we're only looking at about 2/3 of that for hangar space right now. But I know we're gonna need the third one, so I would like to look at that. This was all apron.
Okay.
And then we had the warehouse over here. It was a much smaller warehouse back then, though. Now we need more warehouse, so that's gonna expand for whichever way it goes. And we also had an office building up here that we're not probably going to put in it right away. I think that's all in the future. There's a lot of discussions about a lot of other things for it being very business friendly, so I don't know what this is my wheelhouse. I'm not gonna talk about everybody else's wheelhouse.
Bill, there was, and not to belabor this any longer, but Bill, there was a second layout that were paralleled the old abandoned runway with some hangars on both sides and apron space between them. So it may work better in that configuration, but I think you've got all of that. So that's another thing to consider too as we walk through this.
I believe that Bill did that to minimize the amount of ramp that we were going to have to.
Yeah, you asked for the minimum possible
Yeah.
footprint.
Yeah.
For the BRL, right?
Yeah.
But these buildings won't be as high either, so, because that was like 85 feet or something.
Any negative to that secondary layout was they were further from the runway complex. So there was a longer taxiway length required to get to the site.
It was like $2 million worth of taxiway just to get to. So,
Yeah, I just raised it because I knew that was an alternative that we looked at as well.
I'll pull that out and circulate it back to Craig, and he can distribute the previous report, and you guys can, I'm sure, come up to speed from reading that.
So just for site comparison, that blue area would hold what, about 4 P3s across?
that was sized for 4, yes, sir.
Okay.
Todd, on this sprung structure system, will they use a similar fabric or whatever you'd call that material? Or is this a metal?
No, it's a metal frame. I would encourage all of you to go to Sprung's website and look at how they put it together. It's a very different material. Basically what they do is they sandwich 2 layers of, I don't know what it is, some kind of high-tech.
Polymer or something, or?
And then it's insulated in between. It has, a skylight down the middle, so it's different fabric combinations, but I don't know what it is. It's not the same as this. This is basically like a rubberized canvas.
Do you have any idea of the lifespan, or do they tell you approximately how many years?
They do on the website, and I don't recall what it is. It's like
Okay.
25 or 30 years, something like that.
Okay,
Sounds like it's similar but different.
yeah. Will,
Todd, I keep getting asked, I forget to ask you, but if you build this campus, are you gonna vacate the hangars that you're in?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And I do know on the outer shell for Sprung, when it's time to replace the outer shell, they can just replace the outer shell without tearing the whole building apart. It's just, it's in 2 sets of tracks. So it's kind of a neat system.
And it probably can be done pretty quickly, a lot quicker than a metal structure, I would
Yeah.
imagine, with all the screws.
The last time we were looking at the building, it
Well, he's
was
just talking about the whole building,
about
someone if
16
you had
week
to just do the
construction time.
roof.
And the cost is between 45 and 50% less than doing it conventionally, so.
All right.
All right, so next steps are we're gonna hear from Chestnut and potentially set up a meeting with the airport manager, and, but you don't need anything from us on this, at this meeting.
No, sir, I'm just here to make you aware of
Great.
where we're at with space.
And then our next meeting is on the 12th of August. I'm not sure if there's anything else you might be looking for from us on that one, but if there is, let us know.
Yes, sir.
We'll add you to the agenda and deliberate, so that, main thing is, I don't want us to be the guys holding up you moving forward. So if it's starting to look like that, then get a hold of me.
Remind me, who is that? Chestnut, who is that?
Matt Chestnut is a Space Florida guy.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
So we don't need a motion or anything from the board to authorize negotiations?
No.
Y'all just do that and then bring it back to the board? Okay.
any other questions?
And Bill, you're gonna check into the taxiway numbers again?
Yeah, I'll provide the previous report and I'll do another updated cost estimated on the section of taxiway that Todd says he doesn't want to pay for.
Okay.
I didn't want to pay for any of it.
Or he emphatically says he doesn't want to pay.
All right, excellent, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Todd.
you.
Greg, did you have any other lease proposals to bring up? Did Tyson have anything more to talk to us about?
No, actually, I've not, I mean, he would like to move forward, but I don't know.
So one of the problems that Craig and I were talking about is that when we get these lease proposals come in, I don't feel comfortable, at least maybe you guys do better than I do, that we have a very solid process to you know, almost like a checklist, step-by-step process by this is the, you know, proposals made, next step is who does what by when, you know, and, you know, we got to talk to the FAA, maybe we got to talk to, you know, does it need clear, you know, there's a whole bunch of things associated with how do we make it so that we are as business friendly as we can be when a business comes in, and just like Todd mentioned, you know, business time is money for those guys, so if they got a slow reacting board, we're not being as productive as we can for the community. So we started to build a checklist that, okay, Grok built us a checklist that it looks pretty good, actually. And I think we need to run it probably by Jim when you get a chance, Craig, to kind of see if,
Wait, didn't I share that with you, Jim?
I haven't seen it.
Oh, okay, I apologize.
yeah. So anyway, it's kind of it's just a step-by-step, hey, you know, get this thing done and talk to the FAA about this and make sure this, and so that way, when a guy comes in with a proposal, we can give him this checklist and say, hey, here's the things that you need to do to move your project forward, and make sure that, you know, it's not in some never land where they think we're doing something and we think they're doing
Right,
something,
yeah.
and neither of us are moving forward. So we have actually several of these that are potential opportunities for the airport, MHD Rockland being one. Obviously, the proposal that was given by Paragon 13 back in May is another one. We also had a proposal. Do you want to talk about Mr. Fields' proposal?
It's just for an 80 by 80 hangar. I don't know, you know, it's not probably to the level of these other proposals.
Right, yeah. But he's proposing building it himself,
I
right?
don't know if he's gonna build it himself or not, but he's still gonna have to meet airport design standards.
You're not going to build it. The airport's not going to build it.
No.
What's
I mean, he would he would have to contract with his own entity essentially.
I think that's what General meant.
Oh,
He
okay.
would be the developer of the
Gotcha.
project. And he would get a land lease only.
Correct.
And what's it for?
Just an aircraft storage hangar.
And he also mentioned in that email, as I recall, potentially doing a flying school with it.
Yeah, I don't know the details on that.
Before you leave this MHD Rockland thing, would it be, or Craig, would you feel comfortable? I don't even know how to put this. I think Tyson and Todd together over there could help us possibly with that taxiway, like I say. Is that something you would feel comfortable talking to Tyson about? Sure. And then Todd, and then seeing if they could work as neighbors? They're both kind of military type things, because I don't want to see Tyson get cut out of that over there, and there is some cutting to the amount. Did Tyson want more room to expand in the future?
Everyone wants more room.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Is that something we should, as a board, I mean, is everybody okay with that, with him talking to Tyson about maybe working on, as be a neighbor, or?
I think that's part of being the airport manager, and then he can bring information back to us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, this is the land lease proposal. Oh, that was from Tyson, never mind. All right. Other lease issues? Craig, do we want to talk about the Cloudbusters? Have we gotten any more details from FAA as to their?
I've sent several emails and called to set up meetings, and I've been on.
So the concern has been that I'm pretty sure that the Cloudbusters, a lease for a recreational remote controlled aircraft is a non-aeronautical lease, despite the fact that they're flying things. It doesn't require a runway, it doesn't require an airport. They can do it on a fairgrounds. And so it's not something that we've delved into in a lot of detail. I just want to make sure that we're being consistent with how we approach all of our tenants. And
that's why, though, every lease has to go in front of the FAA here.
Right.
We're federally conveyed property.
Right.
So they have oversight over our entire airport.
Right.
I think just more in general, you can think that if the activity can be done somewhere off airport property, it's non-aeronautical.
Right. And so that means that we should then be applying also the fair market value appraisal to the Remote Controlled Aircraft Association, which requires us to get an appraisal. I don't know whether Steve Albright has agreed to a time or date where he could potentially come and look at that property. Is that what should be our next steps then?
I would need to identify the properties that would need to be assessed and engage with Stephen Albright.
So I think the remote control airport property is one. The other one obviously would be the gun club. Those are the two. Those are the two non-aeronautical properties that we need to start applying fair market value to. So getting the appraisal will be the next one. If you can get a hold of Steve and see when he might be available for that, that would be helpful, I think. The other thing we talked about with respect to leases is aeronautical appraisal, property appraisal. So as we've currently been doing leases, we don't, the property fee, the lease fee is based on the initial lease plus a CPI application at the end of the year, although I think it changed last year, David, when you guys started going with a 1 October annual
Review.
assessment.
Annual adjustment.
So one of the things that we were talking about is if the property is value is changing at a rate that's not consistent with a CPI, which I think is reasonable in a lot of cases, we don't really know whether we're charging a reasonable fee for our tenants. And just applying a CPI to it every year may not keep up with the actual property appraised values for aeronautical property. So this is different than the FMV, this is aeronautical property. So what it would require for us to kind of get a gauge as to whether or not we're in the ballpark with what we're charging our tenants is to have an aeronautical appraisal done for our aeronautical properties on the airfield. And I don't think one's been done here that we can figure out if ever, at least not in a long time. I don't know if you guys have any history to that or not. But what we thought it might be reasonable to do is to have an aeronautical appraiser come in and give a look to our properties and give us a ballpark. Are we in the neighborhood of where we should be in charging our tenants an appropriate lease fee? So Craig knows a guy down in Miami who does this for a living, and he was thinking about getting a couple of other airports in the area to potentially go in together, because it's going to cost us money to do that. And then get those other nearby airports to maybe do the same thing, because the way we've kind of done it in the past too, I think, is compared our fees to other airport fees, but we don't know whether they're any better with their appraised value than we are. So it's kind of going off of a lot of unknowns. So Craig, do you have any updates on discussions with was it Meisenheimer or something like that?
Magenheimer. No, but I have further information that I'm just not really sold on the idea of appraising. Palatka did it a year ago. It cost $14,000 to do an aeronautical.
Palatka did?
I'm just not confident that we would be that far off on our valuations to get an ROI on having that appraised.
Well, it's good to know. I didn't know Palatka did it, so maybe we could just use them as a
I didn't know
baseline.
either till I asked him if he wanted to get one done.
Okay.
Palatka is one of the airports that we have surveyed previously for comparable fee structures.
Right.
So that is interesting that they.
Yeah, that's good to know. Actually, at least we have one baseline that we have to compare to.
Well, when they did Palakka's appraisal, they called Keystone to ask us what we were charging.
Imagine that.
Okay.
Can I say one thing about, so on the Cloudbusters, didn't you say Albright has a minimum fee he charges?
That's what I'm worried about. Like,
So why couldn't we use whatever he's evaluated on the firm? And it's gonna be probably higher than what they've been paying, but why don't we just use that for that?
I would have to.
Sportsman's Club might be different.
Right.
I don't know, because
Right.
it's not
It's
on,
agriculture.
it's not adjacent to the runway or the
Right.
taxiways. But maybe we could just use whatever he said per acre over there, I don't know.
I can ask.
Yeah. See if they buy off on that.
You probably look at different comparables because of the lease site size.
Correct.
Firms are
Right.
so large,
That's a
Yeah.
good point, Jim.
so the comps would be different, I would imagine.
Site size and site usage.
I don't know that he was using commercial industrial as his basis.
He was required to do that by the
Yeah,
FAA.
And I think that's gonna be the case with
Same
all
thing.
non-aeronautical
That's exactly right.
leases. So the only thing I can see where it'd be different from leasehold to leasehold is the size of the leasehold, because, the larger the leasehold, the less per acre.
Well, also the racetrack over there's got improvements to the property. The Cloudbusters just need a strip of grass.
I don't think Steve
He doesn't look at
did
that.
that in his
He's just
appraisal
evaluating the
parameters.
property and the potential.
I think
property.
I have to look back at it, Scott, but I think he appraised it all as if it were ground lease property.
Just
Okay.
ground lease.
Well, I'm just thinking where they're at, if they were to go where we suggested, and we don't even know if that'll be legal out where it was. But if you've already gotten the price for that per acre, I would think that would be pretty compatible for that. Like I say, now they're in a different situation. They're off airport technically they're on airport property, but I'm saying they're not on the taxiway.
Well, the thing is, like Craig mentioned, it's still an airport property, so all appraisals will need to run through the FAA office.
Right. But what I'm saying is, why would you spend $10,000 to evaluate the Cloudbusters to pay $2,000 a year?
Yeah.
Right.
That
Right.
seems like a waste of money.
Right.
The Sportsman's Club, however, is different. I think it will have to be appraised differently because it's not, as we call it, beachfront property. I don't know, that's just a guess.
No, the FAA looks at it, remember, guys, that's what we've learned from this thing we've been going through with the firm.
It's on airport property.
The FAA, every acre on this airport, 2,400 plus acres,
Mhm.
the FAA considers it aeronautical. That lakefront property on Crystal Lake,
Aeronautical.
Aeronautical.
That's why there's the change of use process that has to be gone through to make it non-aeronautical, or have the FAA approve that it's aeronautical. So
Right.
that, here, Frank, how long's the Sportsman's Club been out here? 75?
5 years.
55 years.
Yeah, 1970 or 72
16.
or 68, 68, 69, something like that.
So it's something that needs to be addressed. It's part of the same
Yeah.
process, so.
Okay. Performance appraisal, I've finished the amendments to the performance appraisal for Craig's appraisal. It's located on the shared drive. You guys all have access to the shared drive?
No,
No.
That's weird.
Yeah, you do.
Should have.
Oh, they
no,
don't?
we don't,
Okay.
not
I
everybody
had it,
has it.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe because I was chairman.
I've looked and I don't find it.
So Craig, when
Remote
you
mine.
VPN in, you VPN in to the site, right? To get your email and all that?
Email's just using the web. We're just using a browser
Yeah,
for Gmail.
I think each laptop will have to have it configured, won't it?
You just need a shortcut to it.
Yeah, we're actually going through some server changes. I've had some issues where people are not using the server appropriately, so,
Oh,
yeah.
So my plan was to save that thing onto the shared drive and let people access it, make their comments or, whatever on the form, and then,
Can't we just email a copy of the?
I
form
can.
to people?
yep.
But again, have you made it where we can type
Yes.
it? You've already got that squared?
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, I'll just email it to everybody then.
well,
okay.
that'd be good.
Strategic planning, we did a strat plan. We hosted a company called Wolpert with the same people with the aviation background that did those signs, and to talk to us about a strategic business plan for the airport, which has not been done. It's recommended in the FDOT guidebooks and circulars that airports accomplish a strategic business plan when they, ideally in conjunction with or in advance of the airport master plan being done. So one of the downsides to starting the master plan without having done your strategic plan is it may, if it's done right, the strategic plan would guide the master plan a little bit on areas that we want to work on or we think is most important to direct the master plan to for future development of the airport. So Wolpert came to us and asked if they could talk to us about doing a strategic master plan. We came in and 3 of us were there, or 4 of us were there, and 3 of you guys couldn't make it. But they just basically briefed us on the process that they would use to go through, and it's a fairly involved process that would include building, a mission, vision, values for the airport itself, then digging deeper into doing a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats for the airport. Look at all of not only our internal customers, but our external customers, local business leaders, local political leadership, and that kind of thing. And then take all that together, probably spend the better part of 6 months, I think is kind of the timeline they were looking at, and then put this into a strategic master plan. So, I don't need to do all the talking here. If you guys have other thoughts on what you saw in the presentation that was given to us. But the one thing that I'm pretty sure of, especially following our budget workshop, is it was pretty pricey, especially for an airport our size with our income level. So to be able to fund that approach would undoubtedly, in my mind, require us to get grants to be able to pay for it. Whether or not those grants would be forthcoming, especially with the fiscal year just starting, I think it may take a month or 2 before anybody would even consider thinking about grants for us to do something like that. I don't know, Mr. Prang, you were there for parts of it. You interested in your perception of, what you thought of their presentation, as well as the rest of the team before we decide what kind of things we want to do going forward with it?
I left early yesterday because I thought you were going to ask me that. Just being honest.
Well, can I add
Apologize for leaving
something?
early, yeah.
You know, a couple of things that I thought were very interesting is they used the Lakeland Airport as part of their presentation. One of the airports that they had completed a strategic master plan for, what did they do that, 2017 or 2018, something like that?
Earlier, I think 15.
15 maybe. So Lakeland used them, they developed a plan, and the airport manager talked about how that really helped them in strategically looking at projects on the airport, and that was part of what helped Amazon come in and build a hangar. They're just doing a lot of stuff now. They've got a lot of stuff going on besides annual Sun and Fun, and it really boosted their airport activity. The other thing I thought was really quite interesting is he also shared about an example of an airport in, I think it was Ohio, that they did a plan for. And they were trying to get funding for a runway rehab from the FAA, and the FAA just kept them kind of low on the totem pole until they shared the plan that was developed, and they put them right up there, and the FAA funded them, and they got their new runway. I thought that was kind of interesting. It looks to me like it could be very useful.
What are your thoughts, Dave?
I thought it was informative, and I can see where it would be really beneficial to us. Just that downside is that cost.
Yeah.
They're projecting 200,000 maybe for that. So we would certainly have to have some grant funding. I did just briefly talk with Crawford Powell, who was here from Florida Clay Economic Development for Clay County.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very complimentary about it, how that something like that he could use. It would be a tool for him to use as well when other companies approach Clay County about developing in the area. I know Bradford County has finished their strategic plan this year, the Northeast Florida Economic Development Corporation. Bradford's big supporter of that, member of that. And so the airport was listed in that plan. They did a really good write-up for the airport here. But this takes it 2 or 3 levels beyond. And it would be great. I think it would be a great tool for us.
Yeah.
Well, I talked to Crawford about it too, and he thought they could be able to find some grant funding to be able to pay for it. And I even asked Amber Shepherd today whether she thought, she's in Northeast Florida, Bradford County, Northeast Florida Economic Development Corporation person, and she thought that she didn't think it was out of the question that Bradford could help fund part of it, while Clay helped to fund part of it too, for the grants. So those could be some potential avenues we could pursue some funding. But what do you think, Scott?
I thought it was an excellent presentation. And the fact that they had Lakeland, the improvements there, but Lakeland is a completely different demographic.
Yeah.
Complete. I mean, we don't even come close to that.
Is that Lakeland Lender?
Yes.
They do Sun and Fun?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the population of Lakeland is probably around 300,000 people. And with our RV park and the city, we've got 3,800 now.
We're big.
But I still think it's a good thing. Some of the drawbacks I saw is we're not near a major interstate. You know, I-75 is 35 miles that way, 95 is 40 miles that way or thereabouts. But I think we could benefit from it, and I was especially impressed by the team they have assembled and the various knowledge. The one guy, and I'm bad with names, was his name Rob or Ron?
Aaron.
Well, Rob was the major guy, but
Oh,
Aaron was
Aaron,
former
I'm sorry.
FDOT guy.
Aaron is past DOT. They've got a lady that's a grant writer, and not to take away from you, but I suggested, Craig's busy with other things, and they could do the study, but what I gathered is we could partner with them further down the road. We could buy pieces of the pie of whatever, or whatever you call that. But I thought it was pretty impressive, but I believe that Aaron said he would look and see through his contacts about getting grant, but they might, he said, I think I heard they could maybe come up with 160 from DOT or something, and we might have to come up with 40. But, in just listening to Todd, he needs fire protection over there. So now we've got to figure out a way to get the fire hydrant system over there. Part of their mission on planning is getting all the infrastructure like the sewage and the water. We've already paid for that thing, and I think Clay County Utilities said it would be between 18 and 30 million to get those out here. But sometimes, when you put your money where your mouth is and they can see you're serious about it, I believe it would benefit this airport to have that and say, yes, we had, I'll call them accredited or a professional firm, evaluate our future and what we have the potential for. I don't think it could hurt. And maybe just like this, if we get MH3D Rockland over there, maybe when we get ready to do the runway rehab, maybe we get our 100,000, or whatever. Maybe if we get other people drawn in here. And lastly, I'll say, the simplistic thing, or at least the low hanging fruit, was just clearing land and having land prepped and ready, is what I heard. So beyond the 200,000, they can give us all this advice, but we're still going to have to invest more to move forward. We got to get your trees out of the way. They're interfering with us. But I thought all in all they were good. And I was going to ask Bill, have you ever dealt with Wolpert before? Have y'all partnered with them? Other places that you're aware of? I mean,
We've worked with Wolpert for aerial photography
okay.
and their aerial, not just the aerial imaging, but their LiDAR controlled airspace and approach surveys for decades. Back when you used to do that on a stereoscope manually.
Right.
We have not worked with them as preparing strategic business plans or strategic airport planning.
But the dealings y'all have had with them, do you feel like they're pretty solid?
Oh, yeah, they're a good company. They're well respected. Again, I'm not familiar with their resume or their credentials in the strategic planning realm.
Do you know of other companies that do that same thing that we could compare costs to it?
I do not know them personally. I'm gonna be honest with you, a task like that for an airport your size is, you're not gonna find a lot of other G airports of your size that have undertaken that level of detail. What he was, again, I only heard half because I left at noon, but what they were proposing was a pretty detailed approach. I feel like they will turn over some of the same stones you've already turned over. So maybe they could streamline their approach once they actually got into it and knew more. But for the level of detail that they came on a first pass meeting, I think what they told you was appropriate. Most airports can't afford or don't see the return on investment of a $200,000 strategic plan.
Yeah, there's no
And I would
question.
agree with Scott, the Lakeland examples, that says apples and oranges as they get.
Yeah.
Lakeland was already poised and positioned by geography and population density and population growth in a way that, in fact, I would question that that strategic master plan drew Amazon. I think Amazon drew Amazon to that location. Amazon didn't need a strategic
I think
plan
it's
to
just
find
that-
Lakeland.
I think the permitting was done for them in advance. That was the one thing that was helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so can I get to, I'm gonna be, I told you earlier I left because I knew you were gonna ask me that question yesterday. And on the fly, I did not want to be rude. to my colleagues at Wolpert. I didn't agree with everything that was said, but it was a business presentation. So I think you can get away with some hyperbole possibly in that setting. I have legacy bias because some of what he said implied you weren't already doing some things you are doing. You've done an environmental study on the west side of the airport. You're doing one on the east side. So to say, hey, you should be doing some advanced environmental studies, I think you can just say, check. Check. We're done one, we're doing another one. And as soon as another one presents itself, I think the board would take seriously the advantage of doing that. There's a bit of there's a, build that they will come, there's a catch-22. You could go do an environmental study on this site right here, but if nobody wants that site for 30 years, you've wasted your money.
Sure.
So there's a bit of being ready to pounce on something when you see interest, as opposed to just going somewhere, clearing 400 acres and saying, well, somebody will certainly show up now, we cleared 400 acres. So to me, that was my legacy bias is, you already know some of what you know with dead certainty. What's the business plan going to tell you other than restate those things with some pretty color graphics? So now I've editorialized, and I didn't want to say something like that yesterday because I have a lot of respect for both of them, and they're very well credentialed. I don't know, you can ask. I don't think the FAA would fund this. This doesn't fit. I don't even think it would be eligible to be funded. They fund airport master plans. The FAA does not fund strategic business plans. Would the state fund it? Maybe. Would they fund it in 6 years as you put something out in your regular program? Probably. Would they allow you to trade one of your projects that's in year 2 or 3 or 4 and say, hey, we don't want to do that anymore, we want to do this? Maybe, but now you have a value judgment to make. Do we want to swap out a project that we told them was a priority for something we think is a higher priority? I think you should float out just the general premise of would they even, or districts to even consider funding something like that for this airport? And I would say 200 sounds high to me. You might even find benefit from engaging them for something that would be $6,000 or $8,000 just to come workshop with you as a board and do the SWOT analysis. And give them access to documents you've already prepared and let them just come